Welcome to Talking Infrastructure, the podcast brought to you by global infrastructure consultancy AECOM. In this series, we'll be discussing the hot topics, key projects, and innovations that are helping to solve some of the world's most complex infrastructure challenges. Today's podcast focuses on the much discussed topic of hydrogen, why it's an important part of our transition to a low carbon future, how it's produced, what are its widespread uses, and how do we unlock its full potential. Here in the studio today to discuss the topic, we have Olivier Mussat, the CEO of ATOME Energy. We've also got Sam McGilligan, Hydrogen Director for Europe at AECOM. And joining us virtually from Scotland is Dr. Nigel Holmes, Chief Executive Officer of the Scottish Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association. Welcome, everybody. Sam, I'm going to start with you, as is the theme. Start with the AECOM home team. Let's set the scene before we dive into some of the detail. Why are we here? Why are so many people excited about the potential of hydrogen?
Okay, I think there are three broad groups of people that are really excited about hydrogen, and I'll explain the reason why. Mindful of the fact that there are two principal ways in which hydrogen can be made. One, and that's the traditional way from fossil fuels, and a potential clean way of making it from gas using carbon capture. That's the first way. And the second way is by electrolyzing renewable or green energy to create hydrogen. There's a byproduct of oxygen there as well. Those are the two ways of making it. So the three people, or the three groups of people that are really interested in hydrogen naturally would include the oil and gas industry, because that becomes an enduring market for one of their primary products. The renewables industry, because they make a lot of green energy and they're very interested in it as being a potential product to be made from their assets. And the third one is the big group of users that are interested, beyond those that already use hydrogen, and we will maybe come on to them in a minute. And that's the transport sector, because hydrogen in its form, it has a much better, it has a good characteristic of being able to be transported, and can have a relatively high energy density in some forms. So the trucking sector are interested in it because they can see heavy goods vehicles transitioning to hydrogen. The marine sector are interested in a form of hydrogen because it could be a drop-in for bunker fuel. And another hydrogen derivative, sustainable aviation fuel, is interesting to the aviation industry. So three broad groups of people: the enduring oil and gas majors, the renewable energy industry, and transport generally. Those are the three that I characterize as being
They're your three.
We'll go with all three.
Nigel, if I can come to you next. We've heard Sam talk quite broadly there about different groups, different industries, different ways of using hydrogen. Why for you? Why is Scotland? Why is hydrogen important for Scotland?
Yeah, so Sam mentioned the oil and gas industry and the evolution of the energy sector. What we've seen in Scotland has been in a number of energy transitions in the past. So we've gone from coal, lots of coal in Scotland, and that kind of drove a lot of the Industrial Revolution, the discovery of oil in the North Sea for Scotland and the UK. And now it's hydrogen and renewables, which really are starting to develop at scale. Renewables coming through first. So as Sam mentioned, if you're making hydrogen by electrolysis of water, you'll need gas electricity. And to make that, we need the wind. And we've got lots of the wind in Scotland. So the two things that you need for renewable hydrogen, electricity and water, there's plenty of it here in Scotland. To the point where Scotland will be able to produce more hydrogen than it is likely to need. And then the opportunity is for Scotland to essentially be one of the clean energy powerhouses of the North Sea. producing hydrogen and then exporting that hydrogen, as we do at the moment with oil and gas, exporting that hydrogen into adjacent countries around the UK, across the North Sea, and this is one of the big long-term opportunities.
Okay. I'm starting to get the picture. That's good. So we've heard from the consultant, we've heard from the advocate. Now we're going on to someone who's at the forefront of innovative hydrogen production, Olivier. ATOME as a project, what is it? What are you trying to achieve?
So I love the fact that we've not talked at all about what is the most use for hydrogen today, which is to make ammonia. And the most use of ammonia today is to make fertilizers. Wow. And it shows you where people have concentrated, where they have focused on what they think they can touch. It's about having energy molecules, right? Okay, we have green electrons. We don't have green molecules. And yet our entire energy systems revolve around molecules, whether it's for energy or for chemicals. And today, 50% of our supply of fertilizers is derived from hydrocarbons. So if you look at a sector, the agri-fertilizer sector, which generates more carbon emissions than shipping and aviation combined, you are essentially, you can be right in the middle of a fairway of a market that hydrogen can serve today. Mm-hmm. But it means that you need to have access to water, right? And you need to have access to renewable electricity and very competitively priced renewable electricity, because clearly, whilst we can all decide whether or not we want to take a plane to go to Mallorca, we cannot, and so we can decide to pay a premium for sustainable fuel. We cannot really afford to pay more for our food. So the sustainable fertilizer needs to be competitive with the incumbent fertilizer. So from an ATOME perspective, we really looked at, okay, we are an ammonia developer company, the first one listed on the London Stock Exchange back in December 2021. We really looked at, okay, ammonia, we are going to make ammonia. In the end, we're going to make fertilizer. And we looked for the places in the world where you have some of the cheapest existing renewable baseload power. And because you have a fertilizer, you produce a fertilizer, it's very easy to move in different places, right? So technically, I can produce fertilizer in Latin America and sell it competitively all the way to Scotland. So it's really what we've been trying to do is, honestly, using the hydrogen economy, but in the existing market of today, not waiting for the market of tomorrow to be created.
So we've gone from talking about the energy transition to talking about fertilizer, which I confess the first time I read about this, the first time I was reading into it, is a bit of hang on, sorry, have I got this right? Mm-hmm. Sam, can you explain to everybody, and I'm Olivier, you're starting to get it across, but for people who are just touching this the first time, where's the link?
So the link is that traditionally fertilizer is made from gas, a fossil gas, and it has a really high carbon footprint. And if you're looking to use hydrogen to reduce carbon footprint, then it isn't to create something using for energy, it's to create a product which currently has a high carbon footprint, which is made from a fuel that you can replace. And so all of the traditional fertilizer is made, or the 50% that Olivia mentioned is made using gas. So it's replacement of that gas, and that's the decarbonisation impact. And it is energy, but it's not being used for its energy potential. Mm-hmm. It's being used for its chemical property. And so it's a chemical replacement rather than an energy replacement.
So the demand is there at the moment for as a fertilizer product, but actually that's also creating the technology that we need for the longer term additional uses. So
you're going to make hydrogen if you're going to turn it into fertilizer. Yep. But you're going to make it at volume, you're going to make it at scale. The production facilities are going to be large. They're going to be, therefore, cost-effective manufacture of hydrogen. And it's going to enable the supply of cost-competitive hydrogen as an energy source in parallel with making that ammonia.
So, and the reality is we don't need to have innovation on hydrogen engines, ammonia engine, hydrogen boilers. What you are doing is you are creating hydrogen. I mean, we've known how to make hydrogen from water for 200 years now. Mm-hmm. Right? We're just able to make it cheaper now. because of a number of variables. Thanks to renewable power, we are also able to make it carbon-free. You combine that hydrogen with the existing Haber-Bosch process, which takes ammonia and it uses basically nitrogen from the air. 80% of the air is nitrogen. The hydrogen you have created, get it through the Haber-Bosch process, and you basically go exactly into the existing chemical processes that you have. So there are zero difference on the physical property of zero carbon ammonia or fertilizer with hydrocarbon fertilizer. But the reality is 1 ton of urea is about 4 tons of carbon, right? That is because you use a lot of CH4 to create that carbon. You take the hydrogen away, you take the carbon away. But if you can make calcium ammonium nitrate, so ammonium nitrate, which is ammonia concentrated, which is what we have today, you are essentially dividing the carbon footprint of your fertilizer by 4 right there and then. So chemically, we've known how to do that for 100 years. The market is already there. It's already competitive. So for us, it's also the enabler for the wider hydrogen economy, right? We know we will have hydrogen trucks. We know we will have ammonia ships. I mean, MAN, WinGD, they have engines running now. It's about deploying it. But very quickly, you're going to have this, chicken and egg scenario, which is if I'm a ship owner, okay, I'm going to invest into an ammonia ship, but only if I know I can have green ammonia available today. Yeah. If I'm a green ammonia producer, I need to make sure that there is going to be a ship on the other side to take my ammonia. Mm-hmm. If you look on the fertilizer sector, listen, we are adding 1 billion people on Earth every 12 years. That's a lot of mouth to feed.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So really it's you're solving decarbonizing the production of fertilizer and at the same time creating a supply for the future, as it said, to avoid that chicken and egg situation.
Exactly.
Now, if you're enjoying this podcast, then you'll want to watch out for our next episode, which focuses on collaboration in the rail industry. With voices from Network Rail, Colas Rail and AECOM, it's well worth a listen. So subscribe, follow or sign up to our updates to get the next episode straight to your inbox. Thanks for listening. Now back to the podcast. Obviously, we've heard Nigel, and we'll come back to Nigel in a second. And apologies, Nigel is on via the laptop today. He's crying out, saying Scotland is a really important area for future of hydrogen. You're producing in South America. Why is the choice of the location?
So it's I've spent. I was an engineer in the power sector, in the oil and gas sector. I was in finance. My last job was at the IFC, which is the private investment arm of the World Bank. So I looked at things from let's call it an unsubsidized market point of view, right? It's, you're not going to have the IRA in Latin America. You're not going to have the Green New Deal in Europe, but you can sell your product in these places. And if you're developing any project, how do you make sure that you have the least amount of risks to deal with? And instead of thinking of, I need to build my own power, where in the world can I find existing excess power? Because I'm producing a molecule. That molecule can go anywhere without a transmission line. This is not an electron, it's a molecule. And we looked at, Asia, Laos, Nepal, Cambodia, Vietnam to an extent, a lot of hydropower. And actually Latin America is the place where you have the most excess hydropower today. And hydropower is important at this particular point in time because we need to have 24/7 power. And yes, we can have wind power for very cheap. We can have solar power for very cheap. And that's great, but it goes up and down. We are dealing with chemicals. Chemical processes need to run 24/7. So if you have hydropower, and I don't need to build the hydropower, I can buy it from the grid at a competitive price because that power has really nowhere to go at the moment, you are in a very good place. And so Paraguay, the choice of Paraguay, it's the second largest hydroelectric dam in the world. The country sells all of its excess power into Brazil at a very reasonable rate. But also you're in the middle of the biggest fertilizer importer into the entire world. So I have supply of power and I have demand of fertilizer in the exact same place. So, and I keep my chain of risks very, very, very short. So that's really why. And then over time, as the economy matures, we'll be able to go there. Right? Why is Scotland have some very strong advantages? Because in Scotland, I'm sorry, Nigel, I don't want to do your job, but it's what do you have? Why was Scotland so successful? Right? And historically, it's got a great offshore industry. It's got great engineers. It's got great wind potential. So it will come, absolutely. And this is the best place. You're not going to start doing wind in East Africa, offshore wind in East Africa tomorrow. You will not have all of the infrastructure that you have in other places. So it's the same thesis of, well, I'm going into Latin America because this is where I have a lot of excess renewable power. Mm-hmm. And then you have like different steps. But let's be honest, regulatory environment helps a lot, right? And there's one thing that investors hate is regulatory uncertainty. So, I think it's also was part of our decision process is working in countries where we have very, very clear regulation.
Yeah.
We know where we're going for the next 20 years. And that makes everybody much more comfortable.
Nigel, I'm sure you want to come in there and talk a little bit more about Scotland, and it'd be really interesting to hear from you in terms of what are the key things you're fighting for? What needs to happen to accelerate the hydrogen industry in Scotland and in Europe?
So some of the points that Olivier mentioned are really important when we start to look at the opportunity for hydrogen in Scotland. So the existing offshore oil and gas sector, actually being able to take some of that experience and port it across for the offshore wind, and that will be then linked to the production of the hydrogen. And what do we need to happen? Well, there's a number of key things here. We need to have the production of the renewable electricity at scale, and this is starting to happen. Scotland's got to a point now where over the course of a year, it produces as much renewable electricity as the Scottish the demand for electricity. So it's getting to a point where we're not necessarily in a surplus of electricity because it varies according to the wind and the climate conditions. But there is this opportunity for surplus electricity to be turned into hydrogen. And what do we need? We need actually to look at what's going on around the rest of the world that's encouraging investors to step up. So Olivier mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, the initiatives that are happening in Europe. These are all providing incentives for investment in these large projects. There is work going on with the UK government to provide some of the support for offshore wind, but we need to be careful that they aren't being too ambitious in cost reductions. So, for example, there was a recent round for offshore wind where there was no bids because the strike price was set too low. That's a risk, and what we need to be is realistic about what are the costs, how quickly can we reduce the costs to actually make the opportunity for the investors to balance off with the need to reduce the cost of the renewable electricity supply. And the same will be true for hydrogen. We need to be very pragmatic about how quickly we can evolve and what the costs will be as we move towards that larger scale, lower cost production.
Okay. Sam, why two levels of question. Firstly, AECOM. Apologies for my guests who are not members of our organisation, but what's our involvement in this? Why are we excited about it? But why is everyone else getting excited about it now as well? What's happened? What's changed? Or have I been missing? Maybe I've missed out and I've been living under a rock. But
why AECOM? Well, AECOM is currently helping ATOME with the development and the speedy delivery of their first project in Paraguay. That is part of a group of projects that we have working for other parties, helping accelerate the supply of green hydrogen, low carbon hydrogen. AECOM have a good fit of our capabilities. There's a lot of requirement for permitting, and the capability to permit first of a kind projects is something that we do very well. Historically, we've done, and we're demonstrating that in the hydrogen sector. That role as an owner's engineer for existing systems to come together, I think, is very relevant in trying to accelerate the delivery of hydrogen projects, which by their nature will be modular, and AECOM is well suited to that, because that increasingly demands multiple disciplines. So understanding of the grid, understanding of the ground, understanding how to buy equipment, specify equipment, rather than a traditional chemical process where the engineer needs to be able to design the chemical process. That, to a certain extent, isn't necessary for a fertiliser facility because, as Olivier says, we've done it all before. We've just got to put it together in a slightly different way, and that's perfect for AECOM. So that's why AECOM. Why is everybody else interested? Because we have a lot of industry that is seeking a way to get its activities away from serving the fossil fuel industry. I think that's a motivator. And we have a society that's looking to see technologies that are not dependent on fossil fuels coming forward. Yeah. So those are the ones that's
okay.
If I could, I mean, I've missed
something. Olivier's going to add something.
No. I mean, I will say it's part of a why now, and it's exactly what happened in the solar industry. We've had solar panels since the 50s. We know why it happened in 2005, 2010, and it's when technology and regulation came together. And it was really the regulation drive that pushed the solar industry and created this massive acceleration. And about less than 2 years ago, that moment of when, let's say, technology, business, and regulation met, that accelerated everything. So now, obviously, we are talking about the IRA. Germany is talking about billions IRA is $350 billion just for hydrogen alone. I think in Europe, we're looking at about 200 billion. Germany alone is trying to do a couple of billion just to support imports. So, you can have the best technology in the world. If the market isn't ready, good luck, right? You can have the best idea in the world, but if the supply isn't ready. So it's really that regulatory moment happened and that accelerated everything. So clearly you're going to have messed up incentives, right? This is always going to happen. But we have this great moment. However, I would argue that it is far more complex, right? A solar developer, let's be honest, is one electrician and one lawyer, right? How to structure a PPA, how to connect cables, right? So I'm simplifying things. When it comes to hydrogen, I need an electrician, I need a chemical engineer, I need a water engineer, I need a fertilizer expert, I need an agronomics expert. So you have to have all of these worlds which never really had to talk to each other before, that now have to work together in concert. So from an engineer's point of view, it's fascinating. It's super, super interesting. But guess what? It's happening exactly on the same way on the financing side, where the original investors in the hydrogen economy are the infrastructure people. But actually, they are realizing, holy moly, actually, I have a chemical project. So you have to mix chemical investors, which are short-term in nature, with infrastructure investors who are comfortable with 20-year PPA. Like, I cannot give you a 20-year fixed price offtake agreement on a molecule. It doesn't happen, right? So you have all of these, little things happening and everybody's learning how to live together. So full props to AECOM for having in-house the suite of people who can do water treatment, who can, design a substation, and who can look at a chemical process and say, hey, by the way, you've undersized your hydrogen storage over here.
We'll invite him again. He's good. He's good. Yeah. So this sounds amazing. Sounds great. How do we unlock the potential of it? Thank you for listening to our podcast. Now, it's of course important to us that we're creating the content and discussing the topics that matter to you. So we'd love to hear your thoughts. Please take a minute to fill out our survey, the link to which you can find in the show notes. You could even win a Talking Infrastructure mug for your troubles. Thank you for listening. Now back to the episode. Nigel, what do we need to do to make all this potential a reality?
So, can I go back to
of course you can.
Very simple sort of challenge with hydrogen. Olivier already mentioned the kind of skills that you need to actually develop a hydrogen project. The other challenge is that with hydrogen, there is infrastructure in place for moving ammonia around at the moment, so that there is a clear advantage there. But not all of the markets are looking for ammonia. It's a good market. It's an existing market. But other markets are essentially looking to displace natural gas, displace other fossil fuels. And the big challenge is where we actually produce the hydrogen will probably not be in the same location as where the demand for that fuel is. So we have to then think about where we actually make it, where we use it, and often it's the bit in the middle, moving the hydrogen from where you make it to where you use it. This is where the infrastructure comes in, and this could be a combination of molecules, energy carriers like ammonia, methanol, sustainable aviation fuel is another carrier, but also just moving hydrogen around in tube trailers for local use, and the pipelines for national and potentially within regional demand. And this is where the oil and gas industry again could play a major part, the gas industry in particular, using pipelines which already exist, gas pipelines onshore and offshore, to help us move around hydrogen as gas from where you make it to where you use it. And the bit in the middle, the moving bit, also gives you the potential to store it. So Olivier, when he makes the ammonia, he can store it in big tanks. That's a well understood, it's a cost-effective way of storing it. And again, it's something that is more difficult to do with electricity. You can't just put electricity into big storage tanks. It's not so easy. And this is where often people talk about, should we go for full electrification or should we go for full hydrogen? It's not like that. It's a combination. It's playing to the strengths of electrification and using hydrogen. For example, one of the challenges in the UK is just getting the grid capacity to connect in all these new wind turbines and actually help to move that electricity. This is where using some of it for hydrogen can give you essentially another way of moving and storing energy to take it to the consumer in different forms in the way it makes it more usable.
And presumably, because of the way that you move it, it allows you to, I suppose, decarbonise sectors that don't have a ready supply of electricity. Surely that means it's easier to reach them. Is that a correct assumption?
So there's a tendency for sort of people to look at hydrogen. This is for the hard to treat sectors. So we end up being tasked with decarbonising aviation,
right,
because it's very difficult to get big batteries that are light enough to take a jumbo jet into the air. Shipping, moving ships over international distances, trucks, trains, and heavy industry. The use of hydrogen for large, high-temperature industrial processes, again, could be very important. And a sort of twist on this is potentially using hydrogen for steel production. So rather than using coal or coke to produce steel, using hydrogen. And there's a lot of work now going on in places like Australia, who produce a lot of iron ore, and thinking, well, we could turn that iron ore into iron, make it in Australia. So rather than exporting iron ore, you export iron. And they've got the resources, natural resources, particularly with solar, to produce a lot of electricity, make a lot of renewable hydrogen, and really add value to that economy. And similar in many other places.
The other side, again, it's a molecule, and qualities of the molecules can never be understated. And indeed, I think that I read something which is most likely wrong, but if we wanted to run 100% electric cars, we would need to triple the size of the grid. You look at the not in my backyard mentality that we all have now. Mm-hmm. Good luck, right? Let's not even think about the cost of it. Mm-hmm. Let's think about how many frogs I'm going to disturb, right? And then, environmental activists getting all over it, about, if I owned a house in, I don't know, let's say Norfolk, would I want to have another high voltage line over my head? Most likely not, if it's going to benefit somebody else. So it does give you that flexibility. And in the end, let's look at the much longer picture. The oil and gas sector has been starved of capital, will continue to be starved of capital, and we know that these are depleting resources anywhere. So we are not saying that we are going to be displacing oil and gas with hydrogen, but it's certainly an opportunity to add something else for the future energy and food systems. And again, molecules have a quality which can never be understated. But yes, I think there's a problem within this industry is there is a lot of froth. right? There's been a lot of people selling a lot of snake oil, making promises to government people who choose to believe them. And this is where it becomes important for us to, whether it's, as responsible investors, responsible engineers, to do projects which will actually do something and be relatively pragmatic. But, there will always be somebody who is able to, sell something which will be a dramatic failure, which will make the news and will make, investors pretty wary. And I don't doubt it. And I talked about earlier, skewed incentives. There is a lot of evidence that at the moment in the US, the IRA has caused a lot of inflation in costs for these types of projects because everybody is jumping in the swimming pool at the same time.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's not going to be perfect. There are going to be stories which will make the headlines. But the bigger picture and the long-term picture is that there is no choice. We will move into a larger hydrogen economy.
I'm going to bring that a little bit around in a circle, and I'm going to suggest that the reason why there is quite a lot of snake oil around is that the people involved in doing those projects are not really focused on where the product is going to be used and start back from the use and then say, right, we're going to produce a project to produce the hydrogen for that end use.
Okay.
They're expecting the use to come along for the transport sector. There's a lot of equipment to be developed. There's quite a lot of dependency before you got a strong, reliable use for that hydrogen. And not enough people are looking at the existing uses of hydrogen and saying we're going to replace that. So that's the example that ATOME is showing is not being bound by existing supply chain for fertilizer and saying, well, we've got a facility here, we're going to decarbonise that. They're saying we can make hydrogen in a place where fertilizer is needed. That's where we're going to go, and able therefore to quickly characterise the demand, quickly find the supply, create and deliver a project. There's not enough of that behaviour occurring within the communities of people that are looking at hydrogen projects.
Thank you for listening to our Talking Infrastructure Season 3 podcast. If you have a minute, we'd love it if you could leave a review, as this helps us to reach other people and a much wider audience. Thank you for listening. Now back to the episode. Is there anywhere in the world where really seen as the forefront of this and where they're getting it right? I mean, obviously Paraguay will be, once you're online, that will be the leader. But Sam, is there anywhere, or anybody, is there anywhere that we particularly look to for inspiration?
I think the shift that's happened in Australia in the last 2 or 3 years, where the realisation that the future doesn't need to be coal anymore at a federal level has allowed the states' plans to become more feasible, or be considered to be more feasible, because the states were always looking at this because they didn't carry the burden of the federal government. I think that is a big change. I think South America, Chile, is moving quite quickly. There's quite a lot of activity there. And so what we're seeing is it's areas with either a high renewable resource ready to be exploited, either Saudi. So interestingly, Saudi, which has got a high renewable resource, there's a thread there that is looking for an enduring energy economy post oil. And so they are putting a lot of money into producing green ammonia, and have got the professionals in the room to help them with that. So one of the biggest wind developers, Aqua, is developing the wind and the solar to produce the renewable energy, and Air Products is taking that renewable energy and turning that into ammonia. They're a chemical company that ships large volumes of chemicals around the world, and they're bringing that to new markets, going to turn it into hydrogen and sell it onto their existing clients, to replace, because they're the biggest seller of hydrogen in the world, and to new clients. So they have the vision to start to be ready for those new clients as they come on. So thank you for the prompt on Saudi Arabia.
So Nigel, I think I'm trying to tease out everybody what we need to do to unlock it, but it sounds like, am I right in saying that things are heading in the right direction? It might be like it to be a bit quicker, but Nigel, do you think they're heading in the right direction?
Yes, and I think we would all want things to be moving a bit quicker, but as you pointed out, there are challenges in terms of the availability of equipment, and I think also going forward, we need to be very mindful that a lot of this will be driven by people. So we talk a lot about the natural resources, we talk a lot about the markets and the technology, but we mustn't forget that actually behind this all will be people, the people that either design, deliver or maintain the projects. And again, this is an opportunity. You gave Australia as an example of a location which is looking to migrate from coal to renewables. The key thing will be actually taking the workforce on that journey, because we've had the experience in the UK. If you don't do this right, you end up with a lot of people who were sort of mining for coal, being out of jobs, and not necessarily finding ways of moving them into new employment. So this is not just a technology transition. This is a wider transition of workforces, and in many cases, it's some of the assets that currently are being used for oil and gas could actually be repurposed for hydrogen and renewables. We have examples in Scotland where take Shetland, which is one of the islands which has been essentially a hub of oil exploration and activity, right up the north, off the very top, one of the windiest bits in the UK. So great place for renewables. And they're looking to essentially migrate their assets, like the Big Sun Bow oil terminal, from being oil to being renewables and hydrogen. And I think this is fantastic. So this isn't just about dropping one thing and going somewhere else. It's about making that change and taking people with you. And I think that will be a key part. The other bit is, if we talk about big projects at scale, which will be essential if we're going to bring down the cost. One of the other benefits of hydrogen, it can be deployed at a more local level. And this could be for producing hydrogen that can be used for fueling local vehicles, or possibly even, and Olivier might be able to comment more on this, scaling down some of the ammonia production. So you've got a more local production of ammonia going into local agriculture rather than having a few very large plants. This could actually give benefits of employment, security of supply, and obviously the lower environmental footprint.
So I would tend to agree to an extent on as far as decentralization. I think this is the one big thing that we get from renewable energy is, we used to joke with some friends as we were moaning about being in Angola, as we were dwelling in, when I was in my Schlumberger life, that, why don't we find oil in Monaco, right? It would be so much more comfortable. But so yes, it gives us the opportunity to have energy independence, to have food independence as well. And if you want to get a sense of how weak some of our systems are, you just look at what happened with Ukraine. Russia, Belarus, Ukraine, 30% of the world's fertilizer supply. The UK used to make nearly 2 million tons of fertilizer a year. Now it makes 0. And if you look at the production, and CF Industries just announced they were closing their last plant, and they made it from natural gas. And you realize that actually we were in such dire situation last year that I don't believe it was said publicly in any way. And anyways, it didn't make any economical sense, that natural gas was prioritized in the UK for power. And so anything which was going towards chemical was kind of pushed aside because the power sector will pay more. So we have a slowly changing system, but as they say, revolutions happen very slowly and then very quickly. So we seem to be going in that particular direction, but in the end, I think, I'm talking about infrastructure, and we know that infrastructure doesn't change in 2 years, right? So we are at the forefront. We're trying to make the least amount of mistakes possible, But, and I think this is what Nigel is, very efficiently advocating. The people who know best the molecules should be in the room and should be consulted because, just because I worked for Shell doesn't mean that I'm irrelevant in that conversation. Like if you want to know how to move an LNG ship, the LNG industry is only 30 years old, right? And, we know in the LNG, so I say we, but it's the energy industry knows how to move minus 160 degrees Celsius things across oceans. Okay, hydrogen is minus 260. It's a bit more complicated, but come on, right? It's been, we've made some engineering progresses here and there, right? Mm-hmm. So yes, we have to be impatient because of a challenge, but doesn't mean we have to be stupid or reckless.
I think we're starting to touch on it. I'll get to my next question is and we are already starting to see the impact of this, but when are people on the streets outside the studio, when they're going to see the impact of hydrogen or notice perhaps the impact of hydrogen?
Notice? Well, I noticed it in Aberdeen last week.
Okay.
I got out of the station and I was going to the conference centre, and outside the station was a hydrogen bus, and I sat on a hydrogen bus and I remarked to myself, as I do every time I sit on an electric vehicle, there's no vibration. There's no vibration. There's no noise.
Yeah.
So probably going to see and be aware of an absence of noise, vibration and smell with certain vehicles.
Yeah.
And only the observant will see that in the next 3 or 4 years. But I think from 2027 onwards, you'll be conscious of the fact that there are cleaner heavy vehicles running around on our motorways. So the public aren't going to necessarily perceive that as much, unless they're travelling on the motorways and in and around the service areas where those vehicles are. But the air quality will accelerate and clean. The electric transition is already doing that, but that's not having much impact on the movement of goods at the moment, alas. So we'll start to see that. I think the shipping industry is going to start to transition quicker than certainly I imagined 2 or 3 years ago, if they can get hold of the fuel. But they have an aspiration to be shipping stuff around the planet in a green fashion, and you might see that in the claims of carbon footprint of products. I hope that the agricultural industry will start to see some stability in fertiliser prices with some green fertiliser coming to market. I hope we see that. I'd like to nudge government and suggest that if they put a signal that we should be making our own fertiliser again, that might quickly accelerate action towards replacement of that 2 million tonnes that we don't make anymore. I like to imagine that's happening. And I think anyone who's involved in the oil and gas industry will start to see an acceleration of a transition of careers and an option for coming into the chemical industry as hydrogen starts to take off.
But there is infrastructure, right? I live close to Paddington and we have hydrogen buses. Why do we have hydrogen buses? Because we cannot have more electric buses because the depots cannot get more power because they've reached the limit. So the next best thing is hydrogen buses. Unfortunately, I guess, or maybe fortunately, using green fertilizer, your bread isn't going to taste different. Right, so that's good. That's a good thing.
That's a good thing.
It would be completely imperceptible for the buyer, and yes, it has a challenge. But look at 20 years ago, I think nobody even thought about buying, responsible or sustainably sourced chocolate or palm oil, right? And I don't taste palm oil in my Nutella, but I know that now it doesn't kill your orangutan. Mm-hmm. It used to 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. And so as behaviors, it's our we are also changing. As consumers, we are forcing industries to change. So it's, but I will say today, right? If there's anybody who makes money out of the hydrogen industry, it's conference producers, right? There's a conference every single bloody week.
There's a very expensive one going on at the moment.
Yes. So we just refuse to go to those because we're too busy doing things.
Yeah.
But they are necessary. Right? They are necessary because we need to lobby people. We need to explain the story, and repetition is education. And God knows we have to repeat.
Want more insights from infrastructure industry experts? Check out our latest Future of Infrastructure Global Research Report. In it, we explore one of the most complex, important shifts happening across the world today, the energy transition and what it means for you. We surveyed nearly 850 senior executives and interviewed public and private sector leaders to find practical, profitable, predictable, and people-centric pathways to net zero. To explore the research, please visit infrastructure.aecom.com. Thank you for listening. Now back to the episode.
I'm aware of how long we've been talking, and one final question to you all three. And again, I think we've probably already touched on it slightly, but what excites you most about the future of hydrogen, and what's going to be the most exciting development in the next, let's say, 10 years? Nigel, can I come to you first with that?
So, can I just sort of build on?
Yeah.
And description of going to Aberdeen and jumping on the hydrogen bus. I was at Offshore Europe last week as well, and again, it was great to see an event which, up to now, really has been just an oil and gas exhibition and conference, starting to really explore the opportunity for offshore with renewables, with hydrogen. But coming back to the bus, yes, like you, Sam, when I was up in Aberdeen a couple of months ago, I was seeing the hydrogen buses going down Union Street. I was thinking, wow, this is happening. I was getting excited. But looking at everybody else on Union Street, they were just seeing another bus. It wasn't really excitement for them. It was just another way of getting around. And I think actually this is something that I think we can be excited. We need to be excited by what's going on. But for the consumer, actually what we want is the stuff to be pretty boring. For the hydrogen bus to behave like an existing bus. Okay, Sam, it'll be a bit quieter, a bit smoother. We're also looking forward to the point where we can actually start to displace, for example, natural gas in things like heating and cooking. This one can be a bit contentious sometimes. There's been quite a lot of pushback from consumers in some of the early trials. But there's other trials coming through in Scotland, in Fife, just north of Edinburgh, where people are being given a genuine choice between sticking with natural gas or going to hydrogen. In this case, it's 100% renewable hydrogen. So I think we need to be excited. We need to be realistic. What excites me most, it's projects like the H100 trial, which is testing the consumer acceptance of hydrogen. And that would be a really, really important one because it's all about giving people choices, about finding ways that you can decarbonise people's lives in ways that are practical, deliverable, and affordable. And this is, to an extent, what hydrogen can do, especially in some of the applications, harder to treat areas, heavy goods vehicles, older buildings, which might be difficult, much more difficult with electrification.
Olivier, apart from working with AECOM, what's going to be the most exciting development for you over the next 10 years? It sounds like Nigel's actually saying that I should have said the most exciting developments may well be the most boring developments that no one's going to notice. But
well, it's so let's say there's two categories, right? What's the most exciting thing for us is, to have the first large-scale industrial-scale green fertilizer project. So creating a market, it's incredibly exciting. And that you're going to have a massive development impact that maybe some people don't notice. But in the end, nobody has ever financed one of those. So I'm spending a lot of time with private equity firms, with banks, and explaining how it's going to go. Spending time with engineers and learning new things, right? I don't come from a fertilizer background. I come from power and oil and gas. But you understand these dynamics and how everything is interrelated. And so what will be fascinating for me is in 10 years' time to see this brand new energy and food system having been created out of sheer will and of some incredible innovators. And So I think for me, it's really to see that, right? It's really to have a brand new economy that is being created as we look at it. And suddenly we're going to wake up one day and, you heard the name Aqua Power just now about, doing this solar and renewable project. Aqua Power didn't exist 10 years ago. Now it's one of the largest renewable company in the entire world in 10 years. This is incredibly exciting, right? For me, at least, right? I'm a geek, right? Sorry. and so this is what I'm really excited about. And yeah, it's not going to drastically change our lives, but it's certainly going to make sure that over time, our food systems will remain as competitively priced as possible, and our energy will remain as cheap as possible, not having to rely on, let's say, very uncomfortable deals with unsavory nations.
Sam, final word to you. What excites you? What are you anticipating the most?
Two things. I'm going to pick up on Olivier's point on companies that don't exist now.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's massive number of electrolyzers that are going to be needed to be made. I don't believe the successful electrolyzer manufacturers exist today. The incumbent technologies, they're there because they just happen to be there. The ones that are going to deliver the scale of projects that we're talking about, they don't exist at the moment. They're going to be making electrolyzers really close to where they're operated. So it's a lot of distributed manufacturing around the world. That really excites me. As Olivier is a finance geek, I'm a making stuff geek. So electrolyzers and fuel cells, those companies don't exist at the moment. Those ecosystem supply chains don't exist. That's really exciting because that's employment, that's local employment, that's this continuing story of the power coming local, jobs, economic activity. And the second thing is something that we're not doing at the moment, and it's referenced back right to the beginning of the postcards when I said that waste product from electrolyzer is oxygen. And there's a great opportunity to a synthesis of industries between the new hydrogen industry and the water industry. So the water industry uses oxygen, lots of oxygen, and has the potential to use even more, both in the treatment of wastewater, so cleaning up our rivers, and in getting rid of nitrogen fertilizers, which go onto the land and then come into our water supply and need to be taken out for drinking water. And they use a lot of ozone for that. And the potential, the synthesis between the hydrogen using that waste product in the water industry, that's the thing that I would love to see happening in 10 years that is only being thought about at the moment, because that is industrial symbiosis for me.
Wow. Good. What a great way to end this podcast. Nigel, dialed in from Scotland. Olivier and Sam, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. It's been a really fascinating conversation, and I've learned a lot. So thank you very much. Now, if you enjoyed this podcast, then please follow or subscribe and leave a review, and of course tell your friends and your colleagues to do the same. I'll be back soon with another episode of Talking Infrastructure. Until then, take care and goodbye.